as women go through menopause, our brains become less sensitive to glucose and it becomes more preferential, more receptive, I should say. I want to be really careful with the words I use, to ketones. So, of course, my fasting brain was like, well, that's interesting. So then there is a place for fasting in the menopausal experience because keto can help supercharge our brains. And that's honestly what we see in our community. So many women start fasting and they're like, they drop weight and their brain comes back online. And then on the flip side of that, I've heard you talk about how it's hard on the menopausal body because of the cortisol stimulation of fasting.
Mhm.
So what I'd love to chat about is there a middle ground here between getting our brain some ketones and not letting cortisol get so high that it tanks all the other hormones? What are
Yeah.
your thoughts?
So I come from it from like my lane is the active woman, right? So I know that
Mhm.
most women are underfueled anyway. The way that I come from it is looking at the chronobiology, like we started the conversation. And if we look, cortisol peaks a half an hour after you wake up and then it dips, and you have these pulses throughout the day. So we need to have fuel available to kind of stimulate the hypothalamus to say, hey, you know what? There's nutrition coming in and we
Mm.
can have better appetite hormone control and we can drop cortisol. What I do tell women is that we have to go back to quote normal eating, where you have breakfast within a half
Mm.
an hour to drop that cortisol, stimulate the hypothalamus, go through the day eating really good quality foods, making sure you put a precedence on protein, and then you don't eat after dinner. So you have that overnight quote fast, which is just normal eating. So if we're looking at that overnight
Mhm.
fast, your body has an opportunity to repair, you're developing some ketones. And then when we get into that whole brain health conversation, where I'm looking at it at the new research and stuff that's coming out about Alzheimer's and dementia, primarily, lots of my friends' parents are experiencing it. My grandparents had dementia. So really interested. And we're seeing this cultural
Yeah.
divide first, right? So if we're looking at the population that's being studied right now with dementia and brain fog, it's the women that were not challenged because they weren't allowed or they weren't
Mm.
really proficient to go out and become doctors and lawyers and neuroscientists and all the kind of brain stem jobs that are available now.
Mm.
And they were not encouraged to exercise. So now we're looking,
Right.
the research is coming out about fasting and stuff in postmenopausal women is a cultural nuance because they haven't had the same brain exposure challenges that we've had because of
Uh-huh.
our availability. So we start looking
Yep.
specifically at brain metabolism and trying to get rid of or stop the plaque development in Alzheimer's. This is where they start looking specifically at lactate metabolism to improve glial cell conversations. And lactate is the byproduct of a lot of glucose metabolism. And this is where looking at the high intensity work comes into play. When we look at
Right.
ketones as well, for women who are not exercising and not producing lactate, and because we have this glucose misstep, then that's where the ketones come into play. So if we're looking at a non active
Mm.
population, then yes, we can look at using fasting strategically for resetting our circadian rhythm and improving some of the brain metabolism. But in my pop of active women, we need to change up the activity and make sure that we are working with our hormone pulses. We're producing lactate on a regular
Mm.
basis to affect the brain metabolism in a way that a non exercising population would use with ketones. So this is where you and I have
Mm.
very similar ideas around what we want to do with metabolism, but our populations are different because I'm working within that
Right.
active population and looking at brain metabolism and longevity and body comp through that exercise stress as well as the fueling.
Yep.
And then you're looking at it from your practice and the general pop who doesn't really exercise, right? And so we're looking at two different
Right. Yeah.
populations that we want to have the same outcome, but our methods of getting people there are a little bit different. So I think that
Yeah, that was so really brilliantly said. And, again, to let the listeners in on what you and I talked about ahead of time is, part of the reason we're having this conversation is because we have so many women that both follow us. And what they're hearing is you're saying don't fast, and I'm saying do fast. And what I hate about social media is you need a conversation like this to understand that there's more nuance to this. And what you and I are both in alignment on is when you put yourself in states of hard and you push yourself, you will see your aging brain perform differently. And that is a beautiful thing over time. And what I also hear from you is, so if I have a woman who's completely sedentary, she's never worked out before. And this is one that I've been really thinking about as this exercise conversation has come back online. Then I'm a fan of cycling fasting. That was the whole purpose of Fast Like a Girl, was like, don't fast the same way all the time. Look at it as tools. There are 6 different levels of fasts that I saw in the research, and I saw my clinic and online that worked. But just like you have a dumbbell and you have a sprint and you have the voodoo bands and all this, they're all just tools that we get to pull out when we need them to push ourselves out of apathy,
right,
really, so
right.
that we age better than we've been aging before.
Yeah, and like you said, the problem with social media is they put everything into one bowl and mix it. And so they're like,
That's right.
"Oh, you're a woman of a certain age. You need to fast, you need to exercise, you need to do this and that." And they don't mix, because that's like taking the whole
That's right.
table, dumping it in and saying, "All my tools are together. Why am I not fixed?" It's like, no, we look at
That's
what's
right.
on the table, right? We have some menopause hormone therapy over here. We have exercise over here. We have different metabolic control here, and we want to strategically use them when we need to.
I'm so happy we're having this conversation because that's exactly what I've been saying to my people. We can't take the tools. Like, this is the way I look at it. If I had a toolbox and I was repairing my room and I took the toolbox into the room, I wouldn't pull the hammer out and the screwdriver and be like, well, the hammer's better than the screwdriver.
Right.
I wouldn't put those two next to each other. I would say, okay, there's a time to use the hammer and there's a time to use the screwdriver. I should probably figure out what those times look like.
Yep.
But just the sheer aspect of reels and shorts and the attention span of the public, we have all these tools that we are saying this is good and this is bad.
Right.
And yet they're all just tools.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
beautiful.
I'll get questions from breast cancer patients, and they're like, my oncologist told me I should fast, but I exercise, and I hear from you that I shouldn't fast. I'm like, oh, wait a second. That's another population that's different. We want to use exercise
Yes.
during chemotherapy and radiotherapy as maintenance and keeping things going. But fasting can be really powerful when we're looking at attenuating some of the cellular mechanisms that happen with cancer. But that's a conversation to have with
Yeah.
your oncologist, not through social media with me. So again, we have those different
Yeah.
populations, right? And so it's like, okay,
Yes.
let's stick to this lane.
Yes.
I'm generalizing for the healthy woman who exercises, and there are nuances here and there are nuances there, but I can't explain all of that in a 20-second reel.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love you. You can watch my Instagram and Facebook over the next couple of days. I just put out a video where I'm like, I think we need a user's guide on how to navigate health information on social media. And the very first thing I said is you need to understand there's short form content and there's long form content. And if you're going to build your health strategies around short form content, you're really in for suffering because it's just little snippets of information. Head on over to somebody's podcast, their YouTube, their book, like listen to the longer conversation so you actually get more context to this information. It's
Now I
crazy.
have this image of like the short reel and a woman who's just off the couch, goes to the gym, tries to deadlift 200 pounds with a voodoo floss band, not eating. And then
That's right.
those are all short reels right there.
That's right. That's what's going to come out of the reels from this podcast. That's exactly what's going to happen. That
Yep,
was so
exactly.
good. That was so good. So then this leads me to the thought, which is, do you eat before you work out? And now I will tell you, you actually have changed my mind on that. Watching the reels on you, because I came from the era in my younger self where, do you remember that book called Body for Life?
Yes, I do.
And the guy gave away like $1 million for the people who lose the most weight. And his number one strategy is work out on an empty stomach because
Right.
it forces your body to go find. And it worked in my 30s. And
Mhm.
then when I started to try to lift heavier weights, I was like, oh, this is not working to go in a fasted state.
Right.
So, can you talk about proper nutrition going into a workout, and then what's our recovery meal look like as well?
Yeah. So, as when we have our hormones working for us, we can get away with a lot. That's why we look at all these trends and people are like, I don't really have an issue. What are you talking about? But as we get older, our bodies become more sensitive to things. So, eating it beforehand is
Yeah.
really important. Now, I'm not saying a full meal. We look at the research and we see
Mhm.
that 30 grams of carbohydrate with 15 to 20 grams of protein before a session that has cardio and strength is optimal. Because what we're doing is we are now
Mm.
telling the hypothalamus, which is really where our energy systems are, that there's some nutrition coming in so that we can raise our blood sugar. We have enough nutrition coming in so that we can hit intensities and the hypothalamus doesn't go, "Oh, shit, we gotta start conserving because here's this big stress coming in. We don't have any fuel, so let's start
Mm.
turning the thyroid and everything down." So we need that, and as we get older, it becomes really important because, again, the first thing that goes as we get older, exercising fasted, is lean mass, and we know that it's so
Mhm. Yeah.
incredibly hard to build and maintain lean mass. Not only that,
Yeah.
since we are losing our hormone pulses or estrogen, progesterone pulses because we're
Mm.
flatlining, the hypothalamus is in a little bit of a dysfunctional state because it's like, hey, wait, I don't have to create this pulse every day, but I still have that stimulus for it. So you're bringing food in to also let the hypothalamus work a bit better. So if we are having that
Right.
little bit of nutrition before we go to the gym, brain is on fire, central nervous system is working, we can get more out of that workout. And then within 30 to 40 minutes afterwards, we want to have a good hit of protein with a bit of carbohydrate. Protein more important so
Mm.
after strength training. We need about 40 grams as women who are postmenopause because we're more what we call anabolically
Okay.
resistant to exercise and food. So we don't get
Right.
the same signaling with that 20 to 25
Mhm.
grams. We need more protein, and the protein is important because not only does it allow the muscle to be flooded with leucine, which increases the triggering for building lean mass, but we also have an increased amount of amino acids circulating, which helps with metabolism,
Mhm.
helps with the brain to recover, and to really help with that testosterone and growth hormone response because it needs amino acids to actually function. So when we're looking at it from that whole recovery standpoint, we need some fuel. We want to go into hypothalamus is
Yep.
working so we can fuel our workouts properly. And then we need to refuel afterwards to get adaptation going to help with brain function to keep those signalings going. And then we can move on with the rest of our day.
Okay. So, how long before, just so I can recap, like 40 grams of carbohydrates and 15 to 20 grams of protein beforehand? Was that right?
30 grams before 15 ish. Oh, yeah. And I mean,
Okay.
within the hour, but if you're someone who gets up and goes
Ah,
to the gym at 5:30 in the morning, I don't want you getting up to have food at 4:30. You could have it on your
yeah.
drive to the gym, right? Just as
Yeah.
long as you
Okay.
have something in. Yeah.
Okay. And then afterwards, the key really is bumping up to this 40 grams of protein. And what did you said 30 grams of carbohydrates,
Afterwards,
which,
it depends on what you did. If you're just doing strength training, then you could
okay,
have your 40 grams within that 30 to 40 minutes, and then your real meal up to 2 hours later. And that takes care of the carbohydrate aspect. If you've
got
done
it.
like a high intensity session and you've done a lot of fuel depleting type work, then you do need to look at
Right.
getting the 40 grams and probably around 40 to 50 grams of carbohydrate. So it's almost a 1-to-1
Okay.
ratio post-exercise. And, I mean, some people split
Okay.
their breakfast as well, so they'll have some before and then the rest
Mhm.
of it after,
Mhm.
so it's not increasing total
Yeah.
calorie content, which people get worried about. It's just really manipulating your
Yeah.
food intake.
Okay. Yeah, I go to the gym, and if I have to run errands afterwards, I have a pack of beef sticks that I keep in my car. And I'm like, okay, I'll just eat a bunch of beef sticks to try to get to that protein level.